$1.2 billion was the cost to Norfolk Southern after the train derailment in East Palestine. As a result of this, it brings us to a critical question. Following the train derailment in East Palestine, how does the railroad industry effectively manage the interest of its stakeholders and the communities, employees, and the environment? I'm Alex, and I'm joined by my colleague, Emily. Now, to break down what we're going to discuss, we're going to first start off with a dual approach to how we're addressing the issue with an ethical framework. Then we're going to dive into a digital twin infrastructure with some of the key metrics that we're going to be impacting our over 2 international partnerships, decreasing our costs by 40%, increasing our revenue 10%, but most importantly, saving lives. On February 3rd, 2023, a 1.5-mile-long train in East Palestine derailed, littering 600,000 gallons of hazardous material across the backyards of these communities. The National Transportation Safety Board noted that a sensor went off 17 miles before the train actually derailed, leaving the situation to be 100% preventable. The immediate consequences following this were mass evacuations, environmental catastrophe, and a controlled burn to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The ongoing fallout continues just beyond this $1.2 billion sticker price that Norfolk Southern can just brush off. In fact, the market capitalization of Norfolk Southern was reduced $11 billion, or 20%, over the next 3-month time period when the market stayed flat, leading to the push for the Railway Safety Act of 2023. Now, to dive into our ethical framework, we're going to provide some context. Ever since 1985 to today, the amount of trains that have been derailing have stayed relatively constant, even though AI and technology are getting better and better every single day, and every other industry is able to make a positive impact. And now, to put this number into perspective, there are about 3 to 4 train derailments that are happening every single day. And the impact of this is staggering. Approximately once every 2 months, there's a train that derails that litters over 1,000 gallons of hazardous material across the communities due to cost-cutting, a focus on operational efficiency, and a disregard for human safety. Now, to break down our ethical framework, we're going to look at this through 2 lenses. We're going to first focus on rights-based ethics to consider the most basic human rights to ensure that we're operating in accordance with that. And additionally, we're going to take a pragmatic approach that is able to ensure that what we're implementing is actually feasible, creating human rights-based pragmatism.
Now, we need to understand why exactly derailment happen. This is due to the industry's core business model, precision scheduled railroading, or PSR. PSR can be broken down into 2 key components, those being operating fewer but longer and heavier trains, and then running these trains on a tighter schedule. This has some pros and cons to it. So while on the pro side, we see that it's pragmatically successful in driving down operating ratios, at the same time, because these trains are longer and heavier, they're a lot harder to control and inspect. Also, they exert a lot more force on the tracks themselves, making this infrastructure more prone to failure. Another component of PSR is cutting down the railway workforce. So that means that the employees who are left over have additional burden, and that is no surprise because human error is now the main cause of derailments in the United States. Next, I'd like to take a look at where exactly derailments happen. The majority of derailments happen in rail yards where they're moving about 5 miles per hour, and there's very limited impact. The ones we want to focus on are the remaining 26% of derailments that occur on main lines. These ones are high-speed, high-impact catastrophes like what happened in East Palestine. They run through communities, often carrying hazmat materials. And what we see is that the average train line derailment costs about $300,000, but one incident like East Palestine can cost billions. And that has caused the legal and regulatory framework to completely shift in the United States. We've seen a push for more training for emergency responders. The Railway Safety Act of 2023 and the Clean Water Act is being enforced more heavily. So if any single train derails and spills into waterways, that means that it opens the door to EPA regulations as well as fines. You might be wondering, given all these risks, why do we not have better technology to prevent the problem from happening? We see that we have a network of thousands of sensors across the US, but this sensor network is flawed. These sensors are spaced too far apart. They're miles apart, and that means that if problems occur in the middle, they're unable to be caught. We also see that these sensors are processing many different types of data that aren't consolidated. And while other industries have started to implement AI and other technologies that we'll touch on later, the railway industry is falling behind. We see the very real impacts on our environment in the contamination of air, soil, and water, as well as on the people themselves. We see that an NIH survey conducted after the East Palestine incident saw the majority of residents experience some sort of physical or psychological harm. And when we take a step back and consider all of these pieces together, what we see is that we're hurting our communities, the workers are being overworked, nature is being destroyed, and while shareholders may see short-term returns, at the end of the day, we're creating a lot of risk for billion-dollar incidents like East Palestine. And that is the ethical problem that our recommendation will solve.
Our recommendation takes into account 5 different decision criteria. The first 2 focus on a human rights perspective. We're focusing on how do we actually prevent future derailments, and then additionally, what do we do if and when these trains do derail? The following 3 focus on feasibility at speed and ensuring that we actually restore public trust to ensure our pragmatic lens is considered. Now, if we take a look, we created 4 different recommendations that we could possibly use under this framework. Let's take a look. Under regulations, we note that the speed of implementation and the feasibility simply just is not there. Let me remind you, the Clean Water Act of 2023, the Clean Water Enhancement Act of 2024, and the Railroad Protection Act of 2025 all failed. They have not been able to go through due to the regulatory feasibility. Additionally, looking at if we are able to upgrade every single sensor, we might be able to decrease the number of trains that are actually derail. However, but when and if they do derail, we have no response. Now, for employee training, we are not able to effectively be able to implement this, especially given the circumstances that our employees are already so overworked, leaving digital transformation having all check marks. So let's break down what a digital transformation would actually look like. This, in our view, would be a digital twin that connects the physical infrastructure in the railroad system with a digital copy that has a 3D model of what is currently happening in the rail system. We will be able to do this through integrating sensors, satellites, and the Internet of Things to be able to ensure that we are able to accurately predict and understand what our trains will do before harm actually takes place. Then the impact of this. There is currently emulation and simulation occurring in the railroad industry under a digital framework. But the one thing that the railroad industry is failing to do currently is we're failing to take the data that we're receiving and actually make an impact. Now let's apply this to the case of East Palestine, before, during, and after. Before it would happen, the train would be able to be derailed 17 miles before the train derailed in the end. And then during, we would be able to help first responders be able to create a containment when the train does derail. And then after, we'd be able to learn from the situation and be able to ensure that it does not happen again. And then this implementation would be very feasible because we already have the data and we just need to apply it.
This brings us to our implementation. We propose this 3-step implementation plan across the short, medium, and long term. In the short term, we need to establish this digital foundation. We need to mobilize companies under the AAR and then also establish knowledge-sharing partnerships with other countries such as the Netherlands, Germany, Canada, Australia, and many others that have already established robust digital twin models. From there, we're going to standardize that data and then feed it to train this AI model. We also want to pilot this program in a couple of key states. We use 3 decision criteria to pick which states we want to use, those being the states with the highest mileage of railroads, the most hazmat cargo, and the most number of derailments happening in them. After looking at this data from the Bureau of Transportation, we identified that California, Texas, and then Illinois were the best options to go with because they have the highest number of hazmat cargo passing through them and the highest number of derailments. From there, we want to expand out into regional networks, with California covering the Pacific Northwest, Texas covering the Gulf and Southeast, and then Illinois covering the Midwest and the rest of the Northeast. And then after that, we will expand those geographical gaps and then finally create a truly unified and automated digital twin system.
Now, when we take a look at the impact of our solution, it's important that we are able to consider the financial and safety risks. We note that the projected costs are able to be saved if we save just one East Palestine. We're saving $1.2 billion, and we note that in other countries, they've been able to have 0 track-related derailments due to their digital twin structure. Now, when we take a look at other stakeholders, first off, our community. When we look at our community, we notice that we save these rights. For the nature, we're saving these. For employees, and then for shareholders, but we're doing this through preventing train derailments happening in the first place. Now, to consider our risks and mitigations, first we have financial, but we notice that there's short-term operating.
One question will come from Mr. Jerry Zhao.
Wait, do you want to stand together?
1 minute.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine.
Digital twins, occupational
I think I would break it down into digital twins and then just like in general the rail industry.
look at this, we want to break it down into our digital twin structure and then into the overall rail industry. So first, our digital twins would be able to stop derailments from happening in the first place. We would be able to release safety ports with this and have an online data registry that would be able to improve to be able to be more public about what is happening. Furthermore, we would be able to implement safety protocols in those reports. And additionally, one of the key things that are happening in the rail industry is that these companies aren't actually showing up to their community programs. So for example, in East Palestine hosted two different town halls, and Norfolk Southern failed to show up both times. So if we can make sure that we're showing up to those events and really making sure that we're helping our community through these impacts.